The wrench slipped from my greasy fingers and clattered onto the concrete garage floor at exactly 11:47 p.m., when I heard my wife Seren's voice drift through the kitchen window above my workbench. She was talking to someone on her phone, and her tone carried that particular brand of cold calculation I'd grown to recognize over our 7 years of marriage. "I'm done being a wife, Brooks. Deal with it." I froze underneath my beat-up Ford pickup, engine oil dripping steadily onto my forehead like some kind of twisted baptism. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, fixing the truck that barely ran, while overhearing the conversation that would fix my life in ways I never imagined. "My name is Porter Kellor, and I'm what you might call a professional problem solver. Not the kind that wears expensive suits and charges by the hour. I'm the guy who shows up when your furnace quits in January or when your basement floods during a spring thaw. Blue-collar, calloused hands, and apparently stupid enough to marry a woman whose father made me sign a prenuptial agreement that seemed designed to protect her from someone exactly like me." "No, he's in the garage playing with his tools again," Seren continued, her voice dripping with the kind of contempt that used to hurt but now just made me curious. "Porter wouldn't notice if I painted myself purple and danced naked on the lawn." Brooks. I rolled the name around in my mind like a marble in a tin can. Brooks Carvin, the personal trainer at that fancy gym downtown where Seren had suddenly developed an interest in fitness 3 months ago. The same Brooks who drove a red Camaro with vanity plates that read Gainesville and wore tank tops in 40-degree weather to show off his artificially enhanced physique. I slid out from under the truck and wiped my hands on an old rag, listening as Seren's conversation moved toward the living room. Through the thin walls of our modest ranch house, I could hear every word with crystal clarity. "The prenup protects everything I brought into the marriage, plus anything I earned during it," she was saying. "Daddy made sure of that. Porter gets nothing except what he can prove he paid for himself." That's when I smiled for the first time in months. See, Seren's daddy, Judge Helena Trenwall, was a brilliant legal mind who'd spent 30 years making sure rich people stayed rich and poor people stayed poor. She'd crafted that prenuptial agreement with the precision of a Swiss watchmaker, anticipating every possible scenario where her precious daughter might need protection from a gold-digging husband. What Helena hadn't anticipated was that her son-in-law might actually read the thing. I'd spent 3 sleepless nights going through that document with a magnifying glass and a legal dictionary, trying to understand exactly how thoroughly I was getting screwed. What I discovered instead was that Helena's paranoia had created something beautiful, a contract so ironclad in its protection of marital assets that it worked both ways. "I'll file the papers next week," Seren continued. "By the time Porter figures out what's happening, you and I will be in Cabo celebrating." I chuckled softly and reached for my toolbox. Inside, underneath the socket wrenches and electrical tape, I kept a manila folder containing copies of every bank statement, credit card bill, and financial document that had passed through our household in the past 7 years. Call it professional paranoia. When you work in people's homes, you learn to document everything. The folder also contained printouts of text messages, GPS locations from Seren's conveniently synced smartwatch, and hotel receipts that she'd carelessly left in her car's glove compartment. Amazing how much evidence people generate when they think they're being clever. "Porter's too stupid to fight it," Seren was saying. "He'll probably just crawl back to that pathetic gym where he pretends to be tough." That stung a little, I'll admit. My boxing hobby wasn't exactly professional level, but I'd held my own in enough amateur matches to know which end of my fist to use. More importantly, the gym was where I'd learned that patience and strategy beat raw emotion every single time. I closed the toolbox and headed for the kitchen, making enough noise to announce my presence. Seren's conversation ended abruptly, and by the time I walked through the door, she was scrolling through her phone with studied casualness. "Working late again?" she asked without looking up. "Truck's giving me trouble," I replied, washing my hands at the sink. "Might need to take it to Jerry's shop tomorrow." Hmm. She continued scrolling, her perfectly manicured nails clicking against the phone screen. I'm going to bed. Good night, honey. She paused at the kitchen doorway and turned back to look at me. For just a moment, I saw something that might have been guilt flicker across her face. Then it was gone, replaced by the cool indifference I'd grown accustomed to. Porter? Yeah? We need to talk soon. About us. Sure thing, whenever you're ready. She nodded and disappeared upstairs. I waited until I heard the bedroom door close, then pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the number for Seren Valden, the attorney who'd helped me with some contract disputes over the years. The text message I sent was simple. Need to meet tomorrow. Bring your nastiest smile. Then I opened my laptop and began transferring funds. One of the advantages of being married to someone who considers herself too sophisticated for mundane financial matters is that she tends to overlook the details, like the fact that our joint checking account required both signatures for withdrawals over $5,000, or that the savings account was actually in my name alone since I'd opened it before we got married and simply added her as an authorized user. Most importantly, she'd forgotten that the house, our primary marital asset, was purchased entirely with money from the sale of my late father's property. According to Helena's own carefully crafted prenuptial agreement, anything that could be traced to premarital assets remained separate property. By 2:30 a.m., I'd moved $67,000 into accounts that Seren didn't know existed and changed the passwords on everything else. I'd also sent a carefully worded email to my insurance company, updating my beneficiary information and requesting copies of all policy documents. Finally, I drafted a text message to Brooks Carvin. Hey Brooks, this is Porter Kellor, Seren's husband. We should meet for coffee tomorrow. I think we have some mutual interests to discuss. I stared at the message for a long time before deleting it. Too obvious, too eager. A good revenge requires proper timing, and I was just getting started. Instead, I sent a different message to my buddy Mike at the gym. Need a favor tomorrow, something fun. Then I went to bed, sleeping better than I had in months. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. I met Seren Valden at Rosie's Diner on 5th Street, the kind of place where the coffee comes in thick white mugs and the waitresses call everyone Han, regardless of age or gender. Seren was already waiting in a corner booth, his thin frame hunched over a stack of legal documents and a plate of eggs that had gone cold 20 minutes ago. Porter, he said, looking up with the predatory grin of a lawyer who smells opportunity. Your message was intriguingly vague. Good morning to you too, Seren. I slid into the booth across from him and signaled the waitress for coffee. How familiar are you with prenuptial agreements? Familiar enough to know they're usually designed to screw over guys like you. He pushed his wire-rimmed glasses up his nose and leaned forward. Please tell me you didn't sign something stupid. I pulled out a copy of my prenuptial agreement and slid it across the table. Helena Trenwall drew this up 7 years ago. I'd like your professional opinion. Soren's eyebrows shot up at the mention of Helena's name. Judge Trenwall had a reputation in our small legal community, brilliant, ruthless, and absolutely merciless when it came to protecting her clients' interests. He spent the next 20 minutes reading through the document, occasionally making notes in the margins or muttering under his breath. I drank my coffee and watched the morning crowd filter through the diner, construction workers grabbing quick breakfasts, office workers checking their phones, retired folks settling in for long conversations about the weather. Well, I asked when he finally looked up. This is either the most paranoid document I've ever seen, or Helena Trenwall is a genuine genius. Seren tapped the papers with his pen. She's covered every possible angle for protecting your wife's assets, joint accounts, inherited property, business interests, even intellectual property rights. That's what I figured. But here's the interesting part. She was so thorough in protecting your wife that she accidentally created the same protections for you. He flipped to page 3 and pointed to a dense paragraph of legal text. See this clause about separate property maintenance? It works both ways. I leaned forward, interested. If you can demonstrate that specific assets were acquired with your separate funds, or that you've been the sole contributor to certain accounts, those assets remain yours regardless of divorce proceedings. Soren's grin widened. Helena was so worried about protecting her daughter from a gold digger that she forgot to consider what would happen if her daughter turned out to be the problem. How big of a problem are we talking about? Depends on what kind of documentation you have. He pulled out a yellow legal pad and uncapped his pen. Bank records, receipts, proof of income sources, that sort of thing. I reached into my jacket and pulled out the manila folder I'd been carrying around since last night. Soren's eyes widened as I spread the contents across the table. Bank statements going back 5 years, copies of every deposit slip, receipts for major purchases, and a detailed spreadsheet tracking the source of every dollar that had entered our household. Jesus, Porter, you documented everything. Occupational hazard. When you work in people's homes, you learn to keep records. Soren spent the next hour going through my documentation, occasionally asking questions or requesting clarification. The picture that emerged was clear. Despite Seren's assumptions about her financial security, the majority of our marital assets could be traced directly to my income and premarital property. The house is yours, Soren concluded. Purchased entirely with proceeds from your father's estate. The truck, obviously. The joint savings account. You've been the only contributor for the past 3 years. Even the furniture and appliances can be traced to your purchases. What about her stuff? Her car, her jewelry, her personal accounts, those stay with her. But the big assets, the ones that actually matter? You're sitting pretty. He leaned back in the booth and shook his head admiringly. Helena created a monster, and she doesn't even know it yet. Speaking of monsters, I said, pulling out my phone, I need to show you something else. I'd spent the early morning hours organizing the evidence of Seren's affair into a neat digital package. Screenshots of text messages, GPS data showing her location during supposed work trips, credit card charges at hotels and restaurants where she'd been entertaining Brooks. Soren whistled softly as he scrolled through the photos. This is thorough, almost obsessively so. Is it enough? For what? If you're thinking about filing for divorce based on adultery, this is more than sufficient. But honestly, with this prenup, you don't need grounds. No-fault divorce will work just fine, and you'll come out ahead either way. I shook my head. I'm not interested in divorce. Not yet. Then what? I want her to file first. I want her to think she's winning right up until the moment she realizes she's lost everything. Soren's grin turned positively wolfish. Now you're speaking my language. What did you have in mind? I told him about Seren's phone conversation, her plans to file papers and run off to Cabo with Brooks. I explained my theory that she was operating under the assumption that the prenup protected her from any financial consequences. So, we let her file, Soren said, nodding slowly. We don't contest anything, don't make any aggressive moves. We just respond to her petition with our own documentation and let the prenup do the talking. Exactly, but I want to have some fun first. What kind of fun? The kind that makes her realize she picked the wrong husband to underestimate. We spent another hour planning the details. Soren would prepare all the necessary legal documents, but hold off on filing anything until Seren made the first move. In the meantime, I would implement what we started calling Phase 1 of my response strategy. I left the diner feeling better than I had in months. The morning sun felt warmer, the air cleaner, and even the traffic seemed less annoying as I drove across town to Fletcher's boxing gym. Fletcher's was exactly the kind of place that made Seren wrinkle her nose in disgust. Old equipment, questionable ventilation, and a clientele that included mechanics, construction workers, and the occasional off-duty cop looking to blow off steam. It was also where I'd learned that anger without direction is just noise, but anger with focus becomes something much more dangerous. Mike Rodriguez was working the heavy bag when I walked in, his massive frame moving with surprising grace as he threw combinations. Mike was a plumber by trade and a philosopher by inclination, the kind of guy who could discuss Nietzsche while fixing your kitchen sink. "Porter!" he called out, stepping back from the bag. "Got your message. What's this favor you need?" "I need to borrow your truck this afternoon, and maybe your services as a witness." "Witness to what?" "A conversation I'm planning to have with someone." Mike wiped sweat from his forehead with a towel and studied my face. "This wouldn't have anything to do with that pretty wife of yours and her new exercise routine, would it?" I shouldn't have been surprised that Mike had figured it out. Fletcher's was only 6 blocks from the upscale fitness center where Seren had been training, and Mike had a talent for noticing things that other people missed. "Maybe." "You want some advice?" "Not particularly. I'm going to give it to you anyway." Mike sat down on a nearby bench and motioned for me to join him. "Whatever you're planning, make sure it's worth the consequences. Revenge has a way of costing more than you expect." "This isn't about revenge," I said. "It's about justice." "Same thing, different marketing." I was about to argue when my phone buzzed with a text message from Seren. "Working late tonight, don't wait up." I showed the message to Mike, who read it and shook his head. "You know what? Forget what I said about consequences." He stood up and grabbed his keys from his gym bag. "Let's go have that conversation." The Apex Fitness Center was everything that Fletcher's wasn't. Gleaming equipment, motivational posters, and a juice bar that charged $12 for something called a protein smoothie. The clientele was exactly what you'd expect. Young professionals trying to justify their gym memberships, older folks fighting the inevitable, and a handful of serious athletes who probably wished they were somewhere else. Brooks Carvin was easy to spot. He was in the free weight section, wearing a tank top that showcased his chemically enhanced physique and offering unsolicited advice to anyone within earshot. His hair was styled with enough product to waterproof a boat, and his smile had the artificial brightness of someone who'd never encountered a problem that couldn't be solved with charm and protein powder. "That's him?" Mike asked. "That's him." "Jesus, your wife really downgraded." We approached slowly, timing our arrival for the moment when Brooks finished his set and started loading more weight onto the bar. I stepped forward with my best friendly smile. "Excuse me, are you Brooks?" He turned, and I got my first close look at the man who'd been entertaining my wife for the past 3 months. Up close, he was younger than I'd expected, probably late 20s, with the kind of aggressive confidence that comes from never having been seriously challenged. "Yeah, that's me. You need something?" "I'm Porter," I said, extending my hand. "Porter Kellor." The name didn't register immediately, which told me that Seren hadn't bothered to mention me by name during their conversations. But when recognition finally dawned, Brooks's expression shifted from friendly confusion to something approaching panic. "Oh, hi. I was hoping we could have a quick conversation," I continued pleasantly, "about mutual interests." "I don't know what you're talking about." "Sure you do." I glanced around the gym, noting that our conversation was starting to attract attention from nearby members. "But maybe we should take this outside." Brooks looked like he wanted to refuse, but Mike's presence behind me probably discouraged any thoughts of making a scene. We walked outside to the parking lot, where Brooks's red Camaro sat gleaming in the afternoon sun. "Nice car," I said, walking around to admire the custom paint job. "Must have cost a fortune." "Look, man, I don't know what you think you know. I know you've been sleeping with my wife." I kept my voice conversational, almost friendly. I know you've been planning a trip to Cabo together. I know she's promised to divorce me and take half of everything I own. Brooks's face had gone pale, but he was trying to maintain his composure. You're crazy. Maybe. But here's the thing, Brooks. Seren doesn't actually own half of everything. She doesn't own much of anything, as it turns out. I pulled out my phone and showed him a photo of our prenuptial agreement. Her mother was very thorough when she drew this up. I don't understand. You will. See, when Seren files for divorce, she's going to discover that the house belongs to me. The savings account belongs to me. Even the furniture belongs to me. I put my phone away and smiled. Which means your sugar mama is about to become significantly less sweet. Brooks was staring at me like I'd just spoken in a foreign language. That's not, she said. She said a lot of things, I'm sure. The question is, how much of your own money have you spent on this relationship? The question hit home. I could see it in the way his shoulders sagged slightly, the way his eyes darted away from mine. Brooks had been investing in what he thought was a sure thing, and the possibility that he'd been played was starting to sink in. Here's what's going to happen, I continued. You're going to end this thing with my wife, cleanly, completely, and immediately. You're going to tell her that you've realized you're not ready for a serious relationship, or that you've met someone else, or whatever story you think will cause the least drama. And if I don't? I walked over to his car and ran my finger along the pristine paint job. Then I start making phone calls. To your boss here at the gym. To your other clients. To anyone who might be interested in knowing that you've been conducting personal business on company time. Mike stepped forward, cracking his knuckles. Plus, there's always the possibility that you might have an accident. You know how dangerous parking lots can be. Brooks looked back and forth between us, clearly trying to calculate his options. Finally, he nodded. Okay, I'll handle it. Good man. I clapped him on the shoulder with just a little more force than necessary. Oh, and Brooks, if you're thinking about warning Seren about our conversation, you might want to reconsider. I've got enough evidence of your affair to make your life very complicated. We left him standing in the parking lot, looking like someone had just explained quantum physics to him using hand puppets. Think he'll do it? Mike asked as we drove away. Doesn't matter. Either way, Serene's about to have a very bad day. That evening, I sat in my garage pretending to work on the truck while listening to Serene's phone conversation through the kitchen window. Her tone was different this time, confused, hurt, and increasingly angry. What do you mean you need space? She was saying. We had plans, Brooks. We talked about this. I smiled and reached for my toolbox. Phase 1 was complete. The next morning brought the kind of gray, drizzling rain that made everything look like a bad photograph. I was drinking coffee and reading the sports section when Seren came downstairs, her face puffy from what had clearly been a sleepless night. Morning, I said without looking up from the paper. She poured herself coffee with shaking hands and sat down across from me at the kitchen table. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Porter? Yeah? I think we should talk. I folded the newspaper and gave her my full attention. She looked terrible, mascara smudged despite her efforts to clean it off, hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, wearing the same clothes she'd had on yesterday. I'm listening. Our marriage isn't working. The words came out in a rush, like she'd been practicing them. We both know it. We've grown apart, we want different things, and I think it would be better for both of us if we just ended it. Okay. She blinked, clearly expecting more resistance. Okay? If that's what you want, sure. We can talk to lawyers, figure out the details. Yes, that's what I want. She straightened up slightly, gaining confidence. I think we can keep this civilized, split things fairly, no drama. Sounds reasonable. I took a sip of coffee. Have you given any thought to the practical stuff? Who gets what, where you'll live, that sort of thing? Well, obviously we'll need to sell the house and split the proceeds, and the savings account, the joint assets. She was warming to the topic now, her voice gaining strength. I spoke to my mother about it. She thinks a 50-50 split is fair, given the circumstances. What circumstances would those be? The question caught her off guard. What do you mean? You said, given the circumstances. I was wondering what circumstances you were referring to. Just, the fact that we both contributed to the marriage. I nodded thoughtfully. That's true. Although, now that I think about it, I'm not sure the split will be exactly 50-50. What do you mean? The prenup. Remember? Your mother insisted on it. Seren waved dismissively. That just protects what we each brought into the marriage. Everything we acquired together gets split. Right. The thing is, I've been going through our financial records, and it turns out that most of what we acquired together was actually acquired with money I brought into the marriage. The color drained from her face. That's not possible. The house was purchased with proceeds from my father's estate. The savings account has been funded entirely by my income for the past 3 years. Even most of the furniture and appliances can be traced to my separate funds. I pulled out a folder and slid it across the table. It's all documented. Seren stared at the folder like it might bite her. You're bluffing. Am I? Feel free to look through it. Bank statements, receipts, deposit slips, everything's there. She opened the folder with trembling hands and began flipping through the documents. I watched her face as the reality of her situation began to sink in. The confidence she'd shown just minutes earlier evaporated, replaced by something that looked like panic. This can't be right, she whispered. I'm afraid it is. According to the prenuptial agreement that your mother so carefully crafted, you'll be leaving the marriage with your car, your personal belongings, and whatever money you have in your individual accounts. I paused. Which, according to my records, is about $12,000. But the house is mine, purchased entirely with my separate property. The savings, also mine. You're listed as an authorized user, not a joint owner. She looked up at me with something approaching desperation. You can't do this. I'm not doing anything. I'm just following the terms of the agreement you insisted I sign. Seren stood up abruptly, the chair scraping against the linoleum floor. I need to call my mother. Good idea. I'm sure Helena will be very interested to learn how her own contract is going to work out. She rushed from the kitchen, and within minutes, I could hear her voice from the living room, high-pitched and increasingly frantic as she tried to explain the situation to her mother. The conversation lasted nearly an hour, with long periods of silence punctuated by Seren's protests and what sounded like sobbing. When she finally returned to the kitchen, she looked like someone who'd just been told that gravity was optional. My mother wants to see the documentation, she said quietly. Of course she does. Tell her I'll be happy to meet with her and her attorney whenever it's convenient. Porter, please. There has to be something we can work out. I'm sure there is, but it won't be 50-50. That afternoon, I drove to Helena Trenwall's law office in the upscale district downtown. The building was all glass and steel, designed to intimidate people exactly like me. The lobby featured marble floors, expensive artwork, and a receptionist who looked like she'd been hired more for her cheekbones than her typing skills. Mr. Kellor, she said when I approached her desk, Judge Trenwall is waiting for you in conference room 3. Helena was sitting at the head of a polished mahogany table when I entered, flanked by 2 younger attorneys who looked like they'd been pressed from the same mold. She was a formidable woman in her early 60s, with silver hair pulled back in a severe bun and the kind of penetrating stare that had probably intimidated countless defendants over the years. Porter, she said, without standing. Please sit down. I took the chair across from her and placed my folder on the table. Helena, thanks for seeing me on short notice. Let's dispense with the pleasantries, shall we? Seren tells me you have some fantasy about keeping the marital assets in your divorce. It's not a fantasy. It's what your prenuptial agreement says. My prenuptial agreement protects Seren from fortune hunters and gold diggers. It protects whoever has the better documentation. I opened my folder and began spreading documents across the table. Would you like to review the evidence? For the next hour, Helena and her associates went through my records with the thoroughness of archaeologists examining ancient artifacts. I sat quietly, occasionally answering questions or providing clarification, but mostly just watching Helena's expression as she realized what she was looking at. "This is very thorough," she admitted finally. "I learned from the best. You always said that documentation was everything in legal matters." "I was referring to protecting my daughter's interests." "And you did. The prenup is ironclad. It's just that Seren's interests aren't what you thought they were." Helena leaned back in her chair and studied me with new interest. "You've been planning this." "I've been documenting everything, yes. It's a habit I developed from working in people's homes. Always keep records, always have proof." "For 7 years?" "For 7 years." One of the younger attorneys leaned forward. "Even if your documentation is accurate, there might be grounds for challenging the prenuptial agreement itself. Unconscionability, failure to disclose, that sort of thing." I turned to look at him. "You mean the prenuptial agreement that Helena spent 3 months crafting? The one that Seren reviewed with her own independent counsel? The one that includes specific language about both parties having adequate time to consider the terms?" The attorney sat back, chastened. "Besides," I continued, "I'm not trying to take anything that rightfully belongs to Seren. She can keep her car, her jewelry, her personal accounts. I just want to keep what's mine." Helena was quiet for a long moment, her fingers drumming against the table. Finally, she spoke. "What do you want, Porter?" "I want Seren to file for divorce, just like she planned. I want her to discover that the safety net she thought she had doesn't actually exist, and I want her to understand that actions have consequences." "That's all?" "That's all." Helena nodded slowly. "And if we were to propose a more generous settlement? Something that might give Seren a larger share of the assets?" "Then I'd remind you that the prenuptial agreement doesn't allow for renegotiation of asset division. You were very specific about that." Another long silence. "You realize this will destroy her," Helena said quietly. "She destroyed herself. I'm just declining to be collateral damage." I gathered up my documents and stood to leave. "I'll expect to hear from Seren's attorney within the week. Please make sure whoever she hires understands that I have copies of everything and that I'm not interested in negotiating." As I reached the door, Helena called out to me. "Porter?" "Yes?" "I underestimated you." "Yes, you did." That evening, I stopped by Fletcher's gym for my usual workout. The familiar rhythm of jumping rope, hitting the heavy bag and working through combinations helped clear my head and process the day's events. Mike was there, working on his footwork with one of the younger fighters. He caught my eye and nodded toward the office, where we could talk privately. "How did it go?" he asked once we were alone. "Better than expected. Helena's smart enough to know when she's beaten." "And Seren?" "Seren's about to learn some hard lessons about assumptions." Mike shook his head. "You know, I've seen a lot of guys go through divorces. Most of them just want it over with as quickly as possible. I'm not most guys." "No, you're not. Question is, what happens after you've made your point? You going to be able to live with yourself?" It was a good question, and one I'd been avoiding. The truth was, I didn't know what came after revenge. I'd been so focused on the immediate goal of making Seren pay for her betrayal that I hadn't given much thought to what my life would look like once the dust settled. "I guess I'll find out," I said. The next morning brought a phone call from an attorney I didn't recognize, informing me that he'd been retained by Seren to handle her divorce proceedings. He wanted to schedule a meeting to discuss the terms of an amicable separation. I gave him Soren's number and suggested he call back after he'd had a chance to review the relevant documents. 2 hours later, Seren called me, laughing so hard he could barely speak. "Porter, you magnificent bastard," he wheezed. That poor attorney had no idea what he was walking into. "What did you tell him?" "I told him that his client had been somewhat optimistic about her financial position, and that he might want to review the prenuptial agreement before we proceeded." And he asked if there was any possibility of negotiation. I told him that the prenup specifically prohibits renegotiation of asset division, and that his client's mother had been very thorough in that regard. How did he take it? He asked for a continuance, said he needed more time to review the documentation. How much time? 2 weeks, which gives us plenty of opportunity to implement Phase 2. Phase 2 was something we'd discussed but hadn't fully developed. A campaign of social pressure designed to make Seren's life in our small town as uncomfortable as possible. It wasn't enough that she would lose financially. I wanted her to understand that her actions had consequences beyond just money. "What did you have in mind?" I asked. "Well, for starters, I think it's time that certain members of the community learned about Seren's extracurricular activities. Not in a malicious way, you understand. Just sharing information with people who might find it interesting." I smiled. "I think I know just the people to start with." Martha Henley ran the town's most effective information network from behind the counter of Henley's hardware store. At 73, she had the energy of someone half her age and the curiosity of a professional investigator. More importantly, she genuinely liked me. I'd helped her install a new furnace the previous winter, and she'd been telling anyone who'd listen what a good boy I was ever since. "Porter," she called out when I walked into the store that Wednesday morning. "How's that truck of yours running?" "Much better, thanks to your advice about the carburetor." I approached the counter with a small envelope in my hand. "Actually, I was hoping you could help me with something else." "Of course, dear. What do you need?" "I found this in my mailbox yesterday, but there's no return address." I handed her the envelope, which contained one of the hotel receipts from Seren's affair, carefully edited to remove any identifying information about Brooks. "I think it might have been delivered to me by mistake." Martha put on her reading glasses and examined the receipt. Her eyebrows climbed steadily higher as she took in the details. A luxury hotel room, champagne service, late checkout. "Oh my," she said softly. "I'm not sure what to make of it," I continued with perfectly practiced confusion. "The credit card number is blocked out, but it's definitely from last month." "Porter, honey, this is a hotel receipt for a romantic evening. Champagne, rose petals, the works." "That's what I thought too, but Seren and I haven't been to any hotels lately. Our anniversary isn't until December." Martha's expression shifted from confusion to understanding to something that looked like righteous indignation. She'd been married for 52 years to the same man, and infidelity was not something she took lightly. "You don't think," she began. "I don't know what to think. Maybe it's nothing. Maybe someone's playing a prank." I shrugged helplessly. "I just thought you might have an idea about how something like this could end up in my mailbox." "Porter, dear, you sit right there." Martha pointed to a chair beside the counter. "I'm going to make us some coffee, and we're going to figure this out." For the next hour, Martha grilled me with the thoroughness of a prosecutor. Had I noticed any changes in Seren's behavior? Had she been working late more often? Had there been any unusual expenses or unexplained absences? I answered her questions with just the right mixture of confusion and growing concern, letting her draw her own conclusions while providing enough information to confirm her suspicions. "That poor boy," she said finally, patting my hand maternally. "I had no idea you were going through this." "I'm probably just being paranoid," I said. "Marriage goes through rough patches, right?" "Rough patches are one thing. This is something else entirely." Martha stood up with the decisive air of someone who'd reached an important decision. "Porter, you deserve better than this." By the end of the week, Half the town knew that Porter Keller's wife had been seen at expensive hotels with a man who wasn't her husband. The story grew in the telling, as stories do, until Seren had become the kind of woman who would abandon her hard-working husband for a flashy stranger with more money than sense. The social pressure was immediate and devastating. Seren had always prided herself on her standing in the community. She served on the library board, volunteered for local charities, and made sure to be seen at all the right events. Suddenly, those same events became exercises in public humiliation. "How's it going with the divorce proceedings?" Seren asked when I met him for lunch the following Tuesday. Seren's attorney requested another continuance. Apparently, they're having trouble developing a strategy. "I can imagine. Have you heard from Seren directly?" "She's been staying at her mother's house since last weekend. I think the social pressure got to be too much." "And how are you holding up?" It was a fair question. The truth was, I felt better than I had in months. The constant low-level anxiety of living with someone who was lying to me had been replaced by the satisfaction of watching a carefully constructed plan come together. "I'm fine. Better than fine, actually." Seren studied my face with the practiced eye of someone who'd seen a lot of people going through difficult times. "You know, Porter, there's something I should probably mention." "What's that?" "Revenge is addictive. The feeling of control, of being able to manipulate outcomes, it can become its own kind of drug." "Are you saying I should stop?" "I'm saying you should be careful not to lose yourself in this. Seren made her choices, and she's paying the consequences. But at some point, you need to think about what comes next." I nodded, but I wasn't really listening. I was thinking about Phase 3. That afternoon, I drove to the Apex Fitness Center for the second time in 2 weeks. Brooks was there, as I'd expected, but he looked different. The confident swagger was gone, replaced by something that looked like genuine anxiety. He spotted me immediately and tried to pretend he hadn't, but it was too late. I walked directly over to where he was working with a client and waited until he finished the session. "Porter," he said nervously, "what are you doing here?" "I wanted to thank you," I said loudly enough for nearby gym members to hear, "for being so honest with Seren about your relationship." Brooks's face went pale. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Sure you do. When you told her that you weren't ready for anything serious, that you'd just been having fun, it really helped her understand where she stood." Several people had stopped their workouts to listen to our conversation. Brooks looked around desperately, clearly wishing he was anywhere else. "Look, man, I don't want any trouble." "No trouble at all," I interrupted cheerfully. "I just wanted you to know that I appreciate your honesty. It takes a real man to admit when he's been leading someone on." I clapped him on the shoulder and walked away, leaving him standing there with a growing audience of curious onlookers. By the time I reached my truck, Brooks was already heading for the locker room, his face burning with embarrassment. The next morning, I received a call from Seren. It was the first time we'd spoken directly since she'd moved out. "Porter, we need to talk." "I'm listening." "Not on the phone. Can you meet me somewhere?" "Sure. Where did you have in mind?" "The park on Maple Street, by the pond." I arrived 15 minutes early and chose a bench with a good view of the parking area. Seren pulled up in her BMW at exactly the appointed time, but she sat in the car for several minutes before getting out. She looked terrible. The confident, polished woman I'd married had been replaced by someone who looked like she hadn't slept in days. Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail. She was wearing jeans and a sweatshirt instead of her usual business attire, and there were dark circles under her eyes. "Thank you for meeting me," she said as she sat down on the opposite end of the bench. "Of course. I want to talk about the divorce, about finding a way to make this work for both of us." "I thought we already discussed that. You file the papers, we follow the prenup, everyone moves on with their lives." "Porter, please. I know you're angry and you have every right to be, but destroying me won't make you feel better." I'm not destroying you. I'm just not saving you from the consequences of your own choices. She turned to face me fully, and I could see tears starting to form in her eyes. What do you want? Money. I can get money. My mother has connections, investments. I don't want your mother's money. Then what? What will it take for you to be reasonable about this? I stood up and looked down at her. I want you to understand something, Seren. For 7 years, I've been the reliable one. The one who fixed things when they broke, who paid the bills on time, who showed up when I said I would, and the whole time you've been treating me like I was some kind of consolation prize. That's not true. It is true. You married me because I was safe, because I wouldn't challenge you, or make demands, or expect you to be anything other than exactly what you wanted to be. And when you got bored with safe, you went looking for excitement. I started walking toward my truck, then turned back. The problem is, you forgot that safe doesn't mean stupid, and reliable doesn't mean pushover. I left her sitting on the bench, crying quietly by the pond. That evening, I met Mike at Fletcher's gym for what had become our regular Tuesday sparring session. Mike was a better boxer than I was, stronger, faster, with better technique, but I'd been improving steadily over the years. You're hitting harder tonight, he observed as we took a break between rounds. Good week at work. Uh-huh. This wouldn't have anything to do with your ongoing domestic situation, would it? Maybe. Mike pulled off his gloves and sat down on a nearby bench. Porter, I'm going to ask you something, and I want you to think before you answer. Okay? Are you enjoying this? The question caught me off guard. What do you mean? I mean exactly what I said. Are you enjoying watching your wife suffer? Are you getting off on the power you have over her? I started to give him an automatic denial, but something in his expression made me stop and actually consider the question. Was I enjoying it? The planning, the execution, the gradual unraveling of Seren's carefully constructed life? Yes, I said finally. I am. Mike nodded slowly. That's what I was afraid of. Why is that a problem? Because revenge is supposed to be about justice, not entertainment. When you start enjoying the suffering of others, even people who've wronged you, you're crossing a line. She deserves what's happening to her. Maybe she does, but that doesn't mean you should enjoy delivering it. I put my gloves back on and returned to the heavy bag. Mike's words bothered me more than I wanted to admit, but not enough to change my plans. Phase 3 was just getting started. The Riverside Community Center's annual charity auction was exactly the kind of event that Seren would normally have attended with great fanfare, wearing an expensive dress and making sure everyone noticed her generous bids on local art and donated services. This year, however, her social standing had deteriorated to the point where her presence would have been more of a distraction than an asset, which made it the perfect venue for my final move. I arrived at 7 o'clock sharp, wearing my best suit and carrying a manila envelope that contained the culmination of 3 months of careful planning. The auction was already in full swing, with about 200 people browsing the silent auction tables and socializing over wine and cheese. Martha Henley spotted me immediately and waved me over to where she was standing with a group of other local business owners. "Porter!" she exclaimed, loud enough to be heard over the general chatter. "How wonderful to see you out and about." "Evening, Martha. Mrs. Patterson, Mr. Chen." I nodded to the others in the group. "Beautiful turnout tonight." "Indeed it is," said Mrs. Patterson, who ran the local flower shop and had been one of Seren's regular customers until recently. "Though I noticed some people decided not to attend this year." The comment was clearly a reference to Seren's absence, and it was delivered with the kind of pointed emphasis that left no doubt about Mrs. Patterson's opinion of my wife's recent behavior. "Well," I said diplomatically, "I'm sure everyone has their reasons." "Some reasons are better than others," Martha added with a meaningful look. I excused myself from the group and made my way to the front of the room, where a small stage had been set up for the live auction portion of the evening. The auctioneer was just finishing up the bidding on a weekend getaway package, and I could see that my item was next on the list. "Ladies and gentlemen," the auctioneer called out, "our next item is a unique offering from Porter Kellor. Porter, would you like to tell us about your donation?" I stepped up to the microphone, looking out over the crowd of familiar faces. These were my neighbors, my customers, people I'd known for years. They were also the same people who'd been whispering about my marriage for the past month. "Thank you, everyone," I began. "As most of you know, I've been going through some personal challenges recently. Some changes in my life that have given me a new perspective on what's really important." A murmur went through the crowd. This wasn't the kind of speech people expected at a charity auction. So I've decided to donate something that I think will be of interest to the community. Complete documentation of a 7-year marriage, including financial records, personal correspondence, and photographic evidence of extracurricular activities. The murmur became a buzz of excited conversation. I could see people pulling out their phones, some probably texting friends who weren't in attendance. The winning bidder will receive a comprehensive look at how a marriage can deteriorate when one partner decides that commitment is optional. All proceeds will go to the community center's family counseling program. I opened the manila envelope and held up a stack of photographs, carefully selected images that showed Seren and Brooks together at various hotels and restaurants, along with copies of their text message exchanges. Bidding starts at $100. The response was immediate and enthusiastic. Hands shot up around the room as people competed for the chance to own what was essentially a complete exposé of Seren's affair. The bidding quickly escalated past $500, then $1,000 as the crowd's excitement grew. $1,500! Called out a voice from the back of the room. I looked toward the sound and saw Helena Trenwall standing near the entrance, her face pale but determined. She'd obviously heard about the auction and come to try to stop it. $2,000! Countered Martha Henley, who was clearly enjoying the spectacle. Helena pushed through the crowd toward the stage. "Porter, stop this immediately." "I'm sorry, ma'am," the auctioneer said, "but the bidding is still in progress. Do you have a bid?" $3,000, Helena said through gritted teeth. The room fell silent. $3,000 was more than most people had expected the bidding to reach, and Helena's obvious desperation to win the auction only made the situation more dramatic. $3,000 going once, the auctioneer called out. Going twice. $5,000, said a new voice. Everyone turned to see Brooks Carvin standing near the silent auction tables, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else in the world. His presence sent a fresh wave of whispers through the crowd. Helena spun around to stare at him. "What are you doing here?" "Same thing you are," Brooks replied, "trying to clean up a mess." $7,000, Helena countered. $10,000, Brooks shot back. I watched the bidding war with growing satisfaction. Not only was I about to raise a substantial amount of money for charity, but I was also forcing both Helena and Brooks to publicly acknowledge their connection to the scandal. $15,000, Helena said, her voice tight with anger. Brooks hesitated, clearly reaching the limit of his financial resources. $16,000. $20,000, Helena declared. The room was silent now. $20,000 was serious money in our small town, and everyone understood that this had moved far beyond a simple charity auction. Brooks shook his head, defeated. "I'm out." $20,000 going once, the auctioneer said. "Going twice, sold to the lady in the blue suit." Helena made her way to the stage, her face a mask of controlled fury. She wrote out a check with sharp, angry strokes and handed it to me without a word. "Thank you for your generous donation to the family counseling program," I said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "I'm sure they'll put it to good use." Helena snatched the envelope from my hands and stalked toward the exit. The crowd parted to let her through, everyone staring as she left the building. Brooks followed her out a moment later, but not before shooting me a look that promised future complications. I remained on the stage for another few minutes, accepting congratulations and answering questions from curious attendees. Everyone wanted to know what would happen next, whether Seren would respond, whether there would be more revelations. "I think that's enough excitement for one evening," I said finally. "Thank you all for your support." I made my way through the crowd toward the exit, stopping to chat with various people along the way. The mood in the room was electric. People were clearly energized by what they'd witnessed, and I knew the story would be all over town by morning. As I reached the parking lot, I found Brooks waiting by my truck. "We need to talk," he said. "I don't think we have anything to discuss. You just humiliated me in front of half the town. You humiliated yourself when you started sleeping with my wife." Brooks stepped closer, his hands clenched into fists. "This isn't over." "Yes, it is." I pulled out my phone and showed him a video I'd recorded earlier that evening. "This is Brooks Carvin threatening me in the parking lot of a charity event. If anything happens to me, if my truck gets vandalized, if I have any kind of accident, if I so much as trip and fall down the stairs, this video goes to the police immediately." Brooks stared at the phone, then at me. "You're insane." "I'm thorough. There's a difference." He walked away without another word, leaving me alone in the parking lot. I drove home feeling better than I had in years. The house was dark and quiet. Seren was still staying at her mother's place, and I sat in my kitchen drinking a beer and reflecting on the evening's events. My phone rang at exactly 11:30 p.m. "Porter." Seren's voice was barely above a whisper. "Hello, Seren. What you did tonight, that was cruel. It was honest. It was designed to hurt me. It was designed to show people who you really are." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "I'll sign whatever papers you want," she said finally. "I'll take whatever settlement you're willing to offer. Just please, no more public humiliation." "The papers are already drawn up. Seren will send them to your attorney tomorrow." "And the settlement?" "You get your car, your personal belongings, and whatever money you have in your individual accounts. Everything else stays with me. Porter, please. I need something to start over with. You should have thought about that before you decided to end our marriage. I made a mistake. You made a choice. Now you get to live with the consequences." I hung up the phone and finished my beer. Outside, it was starting to rain again, the kind of steady drizzle that would last all night and leave everything clean and fresh in the morning. 3 days later, I received a call from Seren informing me that Seren had signed the divorce papers without any modifications or requests for changes. The settlement would be finalized within 30 days, leaving me with the house, the savings account, and everything else we'd accumulated during our 7 years of marriage. "She also wanted me to tell you something," Seren added. "What's that?" "She's leaving town, moving to California to stay with a cousin until she gets back on her feet." "When?" "This weekend." I felt a strange mixture of satisfaction and emptiness at the news. The revenge I'd planned so carefully was complete, but now that it was over, I wasn't sure what came next. That Friday evening, I was working in my garage when I heard a car pull into the driveway. I looked up to see Seren's BMW, and a moment later, she appeared in the doorway. She looked different, younger somehow, despite the obvious stress of the past few months. Her hair was shorter, styled in a way I'd never seen before, and she was wearing jeans and a simple sweater instead of her usual business attire. "I wanted to say goodbye," she said. "Okay." "And to apologize, not because I think it will change anything, but because you deserve to hear it." I put down my wrench and gave her my full attention. "I was selfish," she continued. "I took you for granted, and I convinced myself that you didn't notice or didn't care. I told myself that what I was doing wasn't really hurting anyone because our marriage was already over in everything but name. Was it? I thought so. But looking back now, I think maybe I just wanted it to be over because that would make what I was doing feel less wrong. She stepped further into the garage, looking around at the familiar tools and equipment. I know you probably won't believe this, but I did love you. Maybe not the way you deserved to be loved, but it was real. I believe you. Do you? Yeah. I also think love without respect isn't worth much. She nodded, accepting the judgment. You're probably right. We stood in silence for a moment, two people who'd shared 7 years of their lives and were now saying goodbye forever. Will you be okay? I asked. Eventually. My cousin has a business in San Diego, event planning. She thinks I might be good at it. You probably will be. What about you? What happens now? I looked around the garage, at the house beyond, at the life I'd fought so hard to protect. I don't know yet, but I'll figure it out. Seren walked to her car, then turned back one last time. For what it's worth, Porter, I think you'll be happier without me. I think you're right. She drove away, and I never saw her again. That night, I sat on my back porch drinking beer and thinking about Mike's question from weeks earlier. Was I enjoying this? The answer, I realized, was more complicated than I'd originally thought. I'd enjoyed the planning, the sense of control, the satisfaction of watching my carefully laid plans come together. But now that it was over, what I felt wasn't happiness or triumph. It was just quiet. For the first time in months, my phone wasn't buzzing with updates from Seren or messages from curious neighbors. There were no more schemes to implement, no more moves to make. The game was over, and I'd won. But victory, it turned out, was a lot lonelier than I'd expected. I finished my beer and went inside, locking the door behind me. Tomorrow I would start figuring out what came next. Tonight, I just wanted to sit in the silence of my empty house and appreciate the fact that it was mine, all mine, exactly the way I'd planned it. Outside, the rain continued to fall, washing away the last traces of a marriage that had ended not with tears or reconciliation, but with the cold satisfaction of a debt finally paid in full. The story was over. The man who'd started it was gone, replaced by someone harder, smarter, and infinitely more careful about who he chose to trust. Whether that was a victory or a tragedy, I supposed, would depend on what happened next. But that's a different story entirely.